All right, welcome to the Grid Snaps podcast, the premier game development and design podcast. Rob Howard here with Kip Carbone in the flesh. Video Kip.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Finally get to see our beautiful faces.
Yes, this is the second episode that we've done in this new format. I did a couple of weeks ago before vacation. I went and did one with Adam Pratt on arcades and COVID-19. That's a really good one, so go check that out if you haven't seen that yet, and seen and hear it. You can do both. You can totally do the same podcast thing you've been doing. This is getting thrown out there as a podcast, but it's now also a YouTube. So it's a YouTube, it's a podcast. A podcast, it's a YouTube. It's both things. And also just we're doing it live. I mean, it's not literally a live thing. We can try that at some point, but it's I'm not going in and like making a bunch of edits, which I think is good for my sanity, frankly, because all those, I think it was one of the last interview podcasts we did, and oh my gosh, it was like having to go in and edit every bit of crosstalk and every bit of like noise I was getting in each other's mics was, holy cow, that was a pain. And I'm like, I want this podcast to go for years and years and years, and part of that is I'm the only one that does that work, right? So here we are. We're going to do it in a way where...
You are the only one that does the work. I don't do any of it.
Well, you provide... The work you do is provide
I'm the
expertise.
talent, baby.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. All right, so this is part 3 of our series on the game development process from soup to nuts, as we're calling it, right? So, Kip, I think we should recap where we've gone. So we've talked about the green light. And Kip, why don't you regale, if listeners haven't done a cool thing and listened to that podcast, like what is the green light process? What are we even talking about?
The green light process is everything up until the project gets signed technically, or even gets into it's the phase before pre-production. Yeah, basically it's all of the song and dance, the vetting, the hoopla that goes on before it all starts, and that's there involves a game pitch, due diligence on whoever is going to give you the money to make the game, whether it be publisher, whether it be some other outside entity altogether, but it's whatever the rigmarole is to get up to starting the project.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I think that nails it. And as you were talking, I just realized, your lighting is a lot better than mine. The Kip Carbone,
of course, my lighting is always better than
the new Carbone studio, right? That that you just arrived in.
We got this door. It's no longer boxes.
It's great. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you just moved into your new studio location, right? Like,
yeah,
and that's awesome. And actually, I'll be moving again. I know that if you listen to this podcast, you're probably like, these guys always move, and the answer is, yeah, we do always move.
That's the games industry.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. But in both of our cases, though, these are happy. Well, they're always happy moves, but they're not good moves. They're not moves. They're always happy moves because they're by choice. We're not moving because we're being like forced to. But like these are in town moves. We have the same jobs. It's not because we're moving on to a different gig. It's because each one of us are upgrading our living situation, right? Like you found a nicer place. I found a nicer place. Actually had a place built, and I'm really excited about that. That's an amazing process, and it's a lot like software development. I mean, talking to the builder last week, kind of going through the final checklist, he actually said this, and this is something that you would recognize, Kip, from game projects. He said, well, I'm going to walk around, I'm going to make a punch list.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we know about punch lists.
Fire that builder.
But no, I just comment. There's so many. He had a Gantt chart, that he uses,
really?
And like, oh yeah, it's like the difference is that it's not ones and zeros. It's actually like tangible things, right? But there is the same. It's a long-term project. I mean, this project.
How many nails did you pound today?
This project started in like building a house. I've always actually thought building a house is a great analogy for game development because. There's you're building
house always falls down in the end.
Yeah, that's it, right? You get
time will always be the equalizer.
By the way, the other thing is not to totally derail us from the actual purpose of this, but
I gotta tame this highlight on my head though. Hold on a second.
yeah, I'm like,
For
now that
our
we're on
viewers,
video.
I have the world's largest forehead, and this highlight on here is like, see, there we go.
Yeah, and I'm like, because I was jogging like an hour ago, and so my face looks so red because of, even though I took a shower
That's the
and
liquor, folks.
yeah.
It's not jogging.
Here's a true story, and
I
then
was
we'll
jogging.
have to get back on track. Is I hear the cat. Folks, the cat was asleep, and in the pre-show conversation, I was like, I'm gonna leave the cat alone because the cat is asleep. That's the other thing. In my new place, I'm gonna have a dedicated office, and the cats won't be allowed in there. Instead of like a corner of the bedroom with a wall separator, like a room divider thing. So yesterday, I may have became a werewolf, although I don't know this because there needs to be a full
Oh
moon.
yeah.
I was out jogging and I got bit by some neighbor dog, and that's the first time something like that's ever happened where I've been attacked by an animal.
That's wild. That's really
I'm
ridiculous.
fine.
You're fine now, though, right?
I'm
You're not
fine.
infected.
But like the thing about it that like
Are you afraid of water?
I'll say,
You see a glass of water, are you like?
see, I'm not actually up on any werewolf lore other than what they have and what we do in the shadows, where it's
That's
like,
not werewolf lore. That's
well, there's the werewolves in that movie, right? Where there's
that's
like
rabies.
we're werewolves, not swearwolves. But yeah, no, like what I'll say about it real quick is I ran by this neighbor's house. They had a dog on a chain. The chain was a little too long because I was on the sidewalk. And so the chain should have been shorter, obviously. And the dog gets scared as I run by and reacts like real, starts chasing after me. And I turn to run away, but the dog, it's a dog. It's really fast. It bites me right below the rear on like the left leg, and it hurt. I knew I was bit, but what's kind of amazing about it is the adrenaline kicks in so fast that you're bit and it hurts when it happens, and then just the pain goes away immediately because the fight or flight stuff kicks in. And like, I mean, I reacted. I was, especially because the owner was there in the yard. He was in the yard, right? So like I made sure I was bit, and we had a brief conversation. And you always want, like, you always look back in the moment and you're like, I should have reacted a lot tougher. I should have been a more like, you need to take care of your animal. But instead it was like, yeah, you should keep your dog chained a little closer to the house. Yeah.
Is that how you reacted? I thought you gave him a piece of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't quite that wimpy sounding, but I was a lot more conciliatory than I probably should have been. That's what happens on the heat of the moment. You're never, at least now, you're a little different, Kip, because you idle at 70. So you may have reacted a little differently, I think. Than
I've had a couple. I guess I've had incidences like that where, and recently, as of late, I've reacted in a spicy manner.
Yeah,
I'll say.
But anyway, the point of
so.
bringing that up, other than just to completely derail what we're supposed to be talking about.
Let's see the wound. Show the wound to the audience.
I know that is this is a family-rated podcast, but it's fine. But the point is, I thought I even told the guy,
tell him where you got bit.
Well, it was right below the rear, right on the left leg, so right below the rumpus. And the guy asked, "Oh, you all right? You all right?" And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't even think it's bleeding, right? Because I'm feeling no pain. I continue jogging, and I jog another quarter mile, and I thought, hey, I should check this. And I see like my pant leg is completely destroyed. That dog bit through 2 layers of clothes, actually, and it's all bloody and stuff. And it's fine now. I cleaned it up, and but yeah, that was an interesting adventure. All right, so before we get going into the main thing, I'll just say, Kip, what's the best way that these listeners and viewers now can support us? Other than sending us money, which of course we're not above, but if you're not going to send us money, like piles of cash, how can you support this podcast and help it grow?
Recommend it to all your friends, relatives, people that probably would like podcasts with good-looking guys on them. Find us on everywhere good podcasts are served, and that's I think everything, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and to get right down to it, you gotta give us a positive 5-star review, or whatever the
Yeah, good
maximum
reviews are good.
is, right? Because that makes us show up in the searches, right? That boosts like us in the algorithm, and all that jazz. Since this is now a YouTube jam as well, not just a podcast jam, that means the viewers can see in the bottom right of the screen, I have a little Earth Defense Force video playing next to our heads. Not on this video, although you can like this video if you want. Click on the thumbs up, click on the subscribe, click on the bell, all that stuff you hear YouTubers say. Do that as well, for us, and that would be
I wish I had
awesome.
that jingle down. I wish I should next time, if there is a next time, which there will be a next time,
There
I'll have
will
it.
be a next time, Kip. All right. Okay, so in the last podcast we did about this, we were talking about green light, which I know I had you say what it is, but again, that's just you're trying to get a publisher to give you money and all that stuff. Then we go into pre-pro, which is building the factory to build the game. It's not building an engine, it's building a factory, which is many different engines. You're spinning up many different systems, right? Like, how is the concept art going to go? How is the modeling going to be done? How are you going to do texturing? How are you going to do all these things that you need to build a game? How are all the parts fitting together? So now we're done with pre-production, which means, Kip, everything has been figured out, right? Everything's
That
been
last
figured
part
out.
cut it. Yeah, everything's figured out.
Everything's been figured out. You don't need to do any more pre-pro type work again, right? You just make the game. It just comes together magically, right? That's
It's
exact.
just you
It's
kind of
magic.
just start. You start from the beginning and just it kind of just builds itself at that point, and then yeah, it's just like a couple weeks of putting one foot in front of the other, and you're done.
Yeah. And if you're not getting the sarcasm, you're not listening closely enough. Unfortunately, production is never as smooth as that. The truth is, pre-production never really smoothly ends. In fact, I've been on projects where I'm like, are we still in pre-pro? Are we in production? Have we ended pre-production? Like, often, I think probably more often than not, it's kind of how it is, where there isn't like this ticker tape parade. Oh, we're done with pre-production. Now we begin. Instead, it's like you just kind of wake up one day and you're like, okay, I guess we're in production now, right? There is a lot of overlap, a lot of bleed, even if there is, an official end to pre-production, and there probably is on a calendar, right? On a calendar that studio that a publisher is looking at. But as far as us working in the trenches, it's never really as clear cut as that. The fact is, there's just never enough time to make all the decisions you have to make in pre-pro. Some things just do bleed over, and you do the best you can. It's just kind of the reality of the thing. And I will say, Kip, that huge, big budget productions. That's why they spend a lot, like they spend years in this pre-production, right? I mean, have you been on a project where pre-production was longer than, say, 6 months?
It's a good question. I can't remember one that had that. I don't think. Well, maybe yeah, like more than 6 months, but never like years. Never years.
Right.
Usually, most of the productions I've been on. I mean, I've specialized. If the viewers don't know, in kind of smaller game studios that are more scrappy and agile, and I've intentionally not gone to some of the behemoths, giant AAA productions, just because I prefer a smaller studio, the smaller studio environment. So, it's definitely a little bit a much faster turnaround with much less safety net involved.
Right. And that's been my experience as well. I mean, my exposure to big budget AAA game development has been mostly Bioshock and Batman to a lesser degree. But I was brought in as a contractor on those. And so, all those years of pre-pro had already happened. And what was always kind of amazing to me is you would go in there on these kind of, projects that are in need of external help, right? Like they're kind of under the gun, so they're bringing in external folks to kind of firefight, if you will. And you get on these projects and you look and you see, my goodness, they've been working on this for 2-3 years or more sometimes, and you're like, wow, my company could have made like 4 or 5 games like in that period of time, right? But it's not necessarily because, in fact, it's not at all because they're like incompetent or bad at what they're doing, and us folks that work for blue collar small game devs are great at what they're doing. It's because actually, if you're allowed that amount of time for your pre-pro, you'll use it. Period. You will use it, right? And you will find things to do with it because you can spend a lot of time. But when that time is up, you're in production. And so, Kip, I guess I've been going on for a while. What would you say is the difference between like pre-production and production for you? Like, when do you sit down and go, okay, I guess we're in production now?
When you start doing things for real, when you start building, assets that are really going to be used, when you start having the game that's like actual gameplay you're making, actual features that are going to ship. I think the line, like, it's like a very formal line with certain studios, and I guess it depends on the project you're on, right? So, and there might be things that like the milestone dictates in pre-production we don't do any 3D stuff or something. There could be criteria like that. So it's just like pre-production and actual production it's really just like a self-imposed gate, but you're doing production things in pre-production, and you're doing pre-production things in production.
Right. Yep.
So it's kind of a lot, it's a blurry line. But once it starts to, you're in production for real, you're building the real level. This thing is going to ship. It's not hypothetical. You're really you've put in place, all the things, the pipeline you've built previously is being implemented. You're doing it hopefully the way in which you want to do it. You'll certainly iterate more on it. It's not going to be final. And I think once you kind of take whatever you've made into battle, then you really see how it holds up. And then obviously if it needs modification, then you need to do it. And then, it's still, there's still collaboration, iteration that needs to happen from there. But
I think one thing that you try to do in pre-production, and then what you do then is, you're in production when you're actually using it, is this word that, it's one of those words that I hate using sometimes because it's one of those magical words that like you say and it has a lot of different meanings to different people, but I'm going to say it: the pipeline. Okay, pipeline. Right. That's just, I could see you're smiling because you know what I mean. Like, it's easy to get caught up in like, we got to have a pipeline, but it is really important. And in pre-production, you're sort of testing the pipeline, and in production, you're actually utilizing it. And for those that are like, what does he mean by a pipeline? Well, basically, you have in a team production, if you have a game that's being made by more than just one or two people, you have a pipeline. And that pipeline is basically, hey, you have, it's actually easier, Kip, if we think about it in terms of art, because it can be pretty linear. So a concept artist makes a concept, a modeler takes that art and makes a 3D model from that concept. Okay, that 3D model then gets handed off to maybe another environment artist to put in a level, maybe to a level designer to use, depends on what it is, and there's some differences in structure there. And then maybe it gets passed off to a programmer if it's an interactive object that needs code attached to it or something. But there's kind of like a path that game assets go through, right? From beginning to end, from original conception to shippable quality thing. And very roughly, that's what we mean by the pipeline. How do you get from point A, where, just to use an example, let's say you're doing, I'm going to think of a ridiculous example. Let's say you're doing a Napoleon Dynamite game, and you need some sweet dance animations, right? There's that point A is someone in their head thinking we need an animation of Napoleon Dynamite dancing, right? And so the pipeline might start with visual references from the movie of the famous dance. Then maybe the next step is someone Kip, like your wife Nikita, who's an animator, might take this and try to hand key some cool dance moves, right? Then that moves through the pipeline, to get attached to a character, and then that gets put in a level, and then that gets put into like a level cinematic, and on and on and on until you get to, oh wow, there's a Napoleon Dynamite video game with the dance scene in it, right? Like that's in general how a pipeline works. And in production, you're always hoping that you've developed those pipelines and you have them in place. Now, Kip, now that I've gone on about this,
Mhm.
what's your experience been with developing and working with these asset pipelines?
Well, that's kind of my specialty, is creating
Mm,
them, and on the small scale for studios to create very high quality content that's very fast and rapid, and just without kind of the luxuries you have at a giant studio where you can kind of solve things with money and time. So that's one of the things I enjoy doing the most, is creating, these said pipelines. And what do those things look like? It's based upon the intent of the game, kind of what the circumstances are of the team, how your team is composed, how you want to run your studio, what you want, um, kind of your personnel to look like, or like what types of like roles you want to have in it. And then just like what type of game are you making, and then like all those factors. I think we talked a little bit about this in the pre-production of sort of I mean, all this, you should plan this out before you go into production, I guess. So this
right.
but yeah, it's just getting like that, how you're going to work. And I think that the best way to do that is just to think about, like, okay, if you're in the trenches working on the work, like it's like you need to have like a battle hardened uh like weapon to fight with, right? You
Yeah.
can't, even though you might have a very fancy like, wow, this is like the most advanced piece of machinery or whatever, but it's never been, it's not been tried out. And it sometimes you have to go with like what will work under the worst conditions, and also have the least amount of resistance, like have the, so it's, I mean, sometimes doing new things helps as well, like go innovating, obviously, and taking paths that others haven't, and not being bogged down by just things dogmatically. But yeah, I don't know, it's such a broad question, right? Because but it's tailoring it to what you're going to do and what the intent of the game is. Like, so if you're making a first person shooter, it'll have certain criteria. But if you're doing like a third person game, it's going to have different criteria. Or, if you're doing like a side scroller or something like that.
Right.
And you tailor your pipeline to suit those productions, because each one of those has way, or, like an MMO or something like that. It's like way different
Yeah.
set of circumstances and criteria for the team to be building stuff. So I think that the best thing about a pipeline is that it needs to be tailored to the production and the staff, and that's really, I mean, the best general advice I could give on it, which
I
is like
think
it's still
what
very
would be
ambiguous.
what would be good to do, I think, is let's talk about pipelines that we've had, and in our careers that have worked fairly well. And I'll kind of kick this off. So, um, for me, when I think back, I think every company I've worked at, I've had a pretty good pipeline in place for at least part of the time. And in fact, when we worked together, I thought we actually had, you and I, the two of us,
We had the best pipeline.
really good. And I don't know if you're being a little sarcastic or not, but I actually thought
No, I'm
we
not.
had
Yeah,
good, because we had, for a while there, a really tight working process that I thought got really good results.
yeah.
But to name some specific ones, um, at the beginning of my career, um, I remember what it was like making levels with Dave Ellis at Vicious Cycle. And of course, we just interviewed Wayne Harvey a few podcasts back, so check that out for more on that part of my career, and more about that company and everything. But the way that pipeline worked for level design is you would make a level design document, and then there would be a meeting, kind of a pitch meeting, where those documents would sort of be looked at and critiqued, And now, I think not every project I worked on at Vicious had meetings for the documents. It depended on the project. Sometimes there wasn't any meetings on the documentation. It was just on the first playable prototype. But I think for Earth Defense Force, I think there was probably meetings on, just even when you got documentation done, and then you would get feedback. But it was never like, one of the things that was really good about Vicious Cycle, and Human Head 2, I would say, is that, there was always this sense of like, okay, you get, here's the thing, like, I'm building a house right now, going back to that, right? I've definitely told my builder when I think they've messed up and you have to fix a thing. I've given them feedback on the work they've done. Now, one of the reasons why I think our builders told us that, hey, you guys are like the record-breaking nicest customers we've ever had. That's actually what they told us the other day. They actually waived a bunch of extra costs. I mean, they've been like really cool.
Really?
Because we've been nice to them. And the reason is, I guess it's just in my nature to think, okay, look, yes, if there's like a dent in the garage door, I'm going to tell them about that, right? And they'll be cool and they'll fix that. But I'm not I'm not going crazy with the feedback, right? I have like an expectation of, hey, you know what? Things are going to be rough while the thing is being built. It's not going to be perfect. I'm going to squint, right? And I think Vicious Cycle and Human Head in particular, they both did that, at least for my work, fairly well. Where, yes, they would give feedback, but it wasn't like 10 rounds of it, right? It was sort of like, look, we trust you. Yes, we're going to give feedback, but then after a second or third round of it, we're going to be done. And maybe they had issues. Maybe they actually had things. That Rob Howard, he screwed up, but they kept it to themselves after the second or third time right around. I don't know. And I
eventually the thing, it just has to ship, right? So
yes,
like ship it.
Right, exactly.
Given an infinite amount of time and money, you could do anything and you could iterate as much as possible. And there's a great quote from Leonardo da Vinci that art is never finished, it's only abandoned. So you'll never finish it. I should take those words right now. Some things I'm doing, but I listen to my own self. But yeah, like, it's just, I think there comes a point. I think maybe in production too, there's a point where you just cut it off, right? Where you're like, okay, this is good enough to ship. That's not always the greatest mentality. I mean, it's not good when you're just like, you don't care about the product, but if you're, endlessly noodling and it doesn't have to be it's not something that comes under a ton of scrutiny, or, it just has to be good enough, and it's going to be great for the game. That's kind of in production where you'd cut it off, but maybe in pre-production you would continue spinning cycles on it. So
I guess the level design pipeline would be something like paper document for the level, then that gets approved, you make the white box. And actually in the video presentation that the viewers will see, I've shown a lot of white box stuff from other people, from their YouTube channels and stuff, so that's going to be in the video. And so that's kind of the next part of the process, and then you kind of build to like a first playable, where the thing is playable, but it looks, the art isn't in there yet, but you can do all the things, you can play it. And then you get into some kind of art final stage, and then after that there's kind of all these mild edits that a level could have in a game, or a mission if it's like an open world game and it's not really discrete levels but they're missions. But that's the kind of basic flow. Kip, let's talk about, we had a pipeline together that I thought was really cool because it was based on modularity in the pieces that you were building. So I'll go first, and then you can kind of give your feedback on it. I think what I liked about this pipeline is it kind of worked like this. Kip, you built a set of pieces, and by the way, the idea of this was rapid. It was for rapid development. It was punching above your weight. It was like, hey, how do you get a small group to produce a ton of content very quickly? A ton of content that is reasonably bespoke, right? That actually has the feel of something that's been hand built, but can be very efficiently done. And the way you do that is modularity in the parts. And you would build a set of parts that followed certain rules, but there was a lot of freedom in how those things could be used. And a lot of those parts you made were The shapes were sort of generic, so you can kind of build a lot of different internal structures with them. I mean, it was a great set of Lego blocks. And I knew as a designer that, I guess this is like the building the house thing. Like, I knew if I was a good customer to you, you would reward me for that, right? If I didn't try to ask for too many transition pieces, and what I mean by a transition piece, it's like if you're trying to build a level and you're using like this set of Legos.
I forgot about that word.
Yes,
Transition piece.
and you're trying to build using the Lego set that the environment artist, a person like Kip, has given you, and you want to make a shape, some kind of architectural thing, and the pieces can't do it because they just don't fit together right because Kip never designed them.
You
to
can't
do
put them
that.
together right.
Yes. What you do then is you ask, hey, can I have a little piece to fix the little gap that's left in there, right? Can I have a transition piece, I would always call it. And that was always like Oliver Twist, asking for more soup. But if I was a good customer, if I was a good boy, and I followed the rules and built things, as per the way you designed the kit, then if I...
But what were those rules based on? What were the pieces based on?
The pieces were based on... Well, you can answer that, Kip. What were they based on?
They were based upon gameplay dimensions that you created, and you figured out that these dimensions work well for our game. And so, like, I guess in this particular pipeline, I was not necessarily the one building out spaces. The role of environment artist sometimes could mean many different things. It could be either you're just building the Lego piece, or you're placing the Lego pieces and somebody else is doing it, or a combination of those things. Sometimes you're not. In this case, I'm handing them off to Rob down the pipeline to go build stuff. So I'm sort of giving him this set. I'm just reiterating whatever he said in this last bit. But yeah, so the pieces are built upon known dimensions that work really well and create good scenarios for gameplay. So
that's actually
when he asked for a transition piece, yeah,
that's a good point that I had kind of forgotten about in the midst of time. That Kip's absolutely right. Like, this was the pre-production going into production thing. We used pre-production to figure out, hey, what kind of room sizes and shapes, and I did a whole bunch of stuff where I just took cubes.
Now this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this isn't like, oh, the doorway is 200 meters high, or this is like, hey, when you have an encounter and these enemies you're fighting, it's best that this encounter is like 4 meters wide, or like it's actual gameplay stuff. It is also like, okay, the player is 183 units high, and the doorway has to be has to be a certain dimension. That scared Bingo. But it's also based upon gameplay, so it's not as I want the audience to recognize it's not as naive as like, oh, in your game it's 2 stories high and the wall, like it's far beyond that. Like, it's factoring in like, hey, as your player and you're encountering enemies, it's fun from this area. The enemies work well, the AI works well if it has XYZ type of shape to run around in. It's kind of just these shapes, and it's juggling the shapes that are good for gameplay, and it creates good gameplay in there, and then I can ascribe a good visual on top of that, so you sort of have a good level and good looking level too. And that's one thing I think is absolutely lost on. I don't know if other people think that same way, but I won't say it's absolutely lost on a lot of people, but it's definitely a concept that maybe we found on our own, or I don't know. It seemed like a very natural progression for us to figure that out, but it was a revelation when I found that out.
Yeah, and I think, just to reiterate too, that like what Kip's talking about is like, I had a kind of an extended period where without the Lego set, I had no Lego set, and what I did is I just took basically a cube in very simple shapes and built whatever I thought worked best. And then that was what Kip used then to make these snappable kind of Lego pieces. So, Kip went from a gameplay base, like, oh, okay, these types of rooms with these types of room configurations where, like, okay, you're giving the enemies, the AI, cover maybe at 8-meter intervals. We like having columns in the middle, so I better have some columns that Rob could use to snap around, right? It's all very kind of well researched, I guess, during the pre-production phase. And then in the production phase, which is what we're talking about now, that's really like, okay, hey Kip, like give me a Lego set, and Kip gives me the Lego set, and then everything I do is based on the Lego set. Now, you wouldn't do this in hardcore mega AAA, super mega bespoke, because of course that approach is, a little bit, you're going to be limited at times. But the name of the game, and what I thought we really had going well, Kip, is you can get probably 80-90% of what you want in any given situation if you're just willing to work within the rules that you set before. And then once you do that, there was a period of time when I was cranking out 2 functional prototypes a week, which is like blazing fast. If folks,
like
you need to understand, that is fast, really fast. And that's fast because like I had all these awesome pieces, they snapped together really easily based on things we'd discovered before. So I would cook up like a really quick paper design that would be looked at, approved. I would, because the Lego pieces fit together so well, it would only take me like maybe 4 hours to get an initial white box built. Obviously there's some engineering muscle that goes into the gameplay. The sort of thing that
not that much muscle.
As
much muscle as in the environments, but
but yeah, I mean, it worked really quite well, and of course, that particular project is, it's just one of those game industry things. We worked really well, and it's just gone. It's there's nothing. The company got bought and changed gears and everything, but for a while we were really just pumping out awesome
those are the glory days. Those were the glory days.
And we continued that pipeline. It was still there on some level, but like we just kind of hit for a while, you and I, just very personally, a really nice little equilibrium of awesomeness that was really a lot of fun, and it almost doesn't matter in a way like what the end result is, because it's about it's that Black Hawk Down thing that we've shared, right? It's about the fella next to you, and we worked really well together on that pipeline, so that was really fun production work.
Well, I think it was the collaboration. That's what was so great, and that's what, when you don't have collaboration, you don't have that creativity. Like you haven't. I mean, I say this all the time, and it sounds, I'm sick of saying it, but you have an idea, I have an idea, and we put it together and we make something better that neither one of us could come up with, and that's what we came up with this pipeline. It's as much you as it was me, and it worked really well because we would collaborate. Like, I mean, we sat next to each other. We're always like riffing off of each other, and that's why you could go so fast and create. I mean, it was, I thought, very high quality stuff. And given the resources we had, it was like extremely. I'm pretty proud of it. So, it
was great. Yeah, and
good stuff.
So thinking about like other pipelines, I mean the Lost Within pipeline I thought was pretty good too. That was a little. What was interesting about that project is again, survival horror game is, that game had, again, it had some similar environment art ideas that we just talked about. It was a Lego set of pieces that the art people put together based on white boxes that the level designers did. So actually very similar kind of notion, where like, and these are the things that you do in pre-production to make production smooth. You figure out like what sacrifices should you
I guess
make.
It's like, well, I guess a better way analogy, it's sort of like, hey, we're going to go over these falls, right? We're going to figure out a good way to like cushion the blow.
Right, yes. Yeah, like, because we had
it's going to be rough, right?
We had all
like,
these
what's
levels. They were linear levels, and they had to have so much in it. And so, okay, from the art perspective, and it was like about a 20-25 person project or whatever, which is, fairly small. Like big for a mobile project, but small for the type of game it was, I think. And so, so we had, okay, here's what we're going to do. The level designer is going to come up with some white box prototypes, and we're going to figure out what we can get away with in terms of topographical variety. This game's indoors. We don't need a lot of things going up and down. We can have a set of stairs to allow you to go up a floor, and then that's it. It's going to be flat because it's a horror game. You're going to go in and out of boxy rooms. We're fine with that. That enabled art to say, okay, cool, we can make these tiles that snap together for walls and floors. We basically know that you're almost never going to need like a ramp. You're probably never going to need like a pit in the middle, or except for like actually there was one or two of those in the game as special one-offs, but
remember when we were figuring out our tile set, and then like there's like been some. I had another revelation about this. Like you're never going to anticipate everything you need, right?
Yep.
And that expectation is absolutely detriment. Like if you we had that expectation on our thing, right, where it was like every single scenario you could ever it's impossible. It's just an absolute impossibility. So I think getting the basis for it, but then not being afraid to iterate after that. Of like, oh, actually, I do need a 1 meter thing, and you just add to it, and then it just
right.
But anyway,
yeah, there's something that happens in production sometimes. This is a good time to transition to this kind of the last topic I wanted to hit on this, which was, in production there's sort of expectations, and what ends up happening is like there's always like expectations, reality, and the two fight each other for a while, and reality always wins. I think reality is undefeated in a lot of ways, right? Reality
100%.
It's
well, maybe not that.
But like when it comes to game production reality usually eventually wins, or the product is released and it's garbage because reality didn't win enough, right? And it's things like okay, like because I was thinking about this when you brought up, okay, you have a production pipeline, it's going well, but there's this expectation that it's going to be able to handle everything that the game possibly needs, and when something comes up that the game clearly has to have, because
I think when it's like it's like when you don't factor. Well, number one, you go awry when you factor in that you're not going to iterate on anything else of the game, right? And it's like you just add in something, and you're like, oh, like this changes. This is a game changer, and so then that like trickles down to other areas, and so if you don't anticipate, and those things you want to add in because you're like,
right.
You know what, this would be like 100 times better if we added this one thing or whatever this thing is, and then if it does have repercussions, you have to anticipate those repercussions and move on them. But you can't look at it like, oh, your pipeline failed me. Bah,
Right, yeah. And
you just have to look at like, hey, look, we're doing something. This has changed a little bit, and we're gonna like go with it. And,
there's
I think all parties are on board, but you get what I mean.
I do, yeah, because what ends up happening is you establish a pipeline, it's working well, but then you discover things about your game that you didn't know and couldn't have possibly have known until the game was built.
And you'll only know that in production.
Yes, and that's
I will add. You'll only know that,
because the game, certain aspects about your game, no matter how well you.
And if you think you don't know. You've not made a game.
Right. Yeah, and then you have to really be adroit, and you have to have some agility to adjust to those things. And what I was talking about, reality versus whatever, is there's sometimes there's a lot of resistance then to change, like, oh, the game really needs this type of thing in the level design, in the art, whatever it is, because we've discovered these new things, but that might go a little bit against the plan. Heaven forbid, it might actually change the scope, which is kind of what I'm trying to drive towards here, is scope, right?
Okay.
And two things have to happen. You have to either decide, and this is valid too, you can just put your foot down and say, I don't care about that cool thing we discovered. We're not going to do it because we don't have time and we can't, right?
Yeah.
And I've definitely had on past games with my other employers situations like that where I thought, hey, this could have been really cool, but it just could not happen, and we just have to sort of say maybe for the future, right? Or you make it happen, and you do what it takes to make it happen, and it's sooner the better at that sort of thing. That's why I say reality always wins. Like, you're going to have to make an adjustment one way or the other, and put your foot down and make that adjustment. So, scope reduction. Go ahead, Kip.
Yeah. I think a good pipeline will anticipate that in some capacity, right? It'll have room for iteration. If it has no room for iteration, then it's like absolutely, I think, dead in the water.
Right.
I think I said that before, but anyway, anyways. I threw you off your train of thought now.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about now is I am talking about scope reduction, which will be like the last thing we talk about on this. So when you're in
Yeah.
production, right now the rubber's meeting the road here. You're actually getting through milestones. Time is ticking away. Months are going away. And what's going to inevitably happen on every project, and this really is, again, every project. There's not a game project that I'm aware of any consequence or complexity that did not have this happen on some level. Where here's the game you plan to deliver, and you have to go like that, or maybe even like this, right? You have to, because there's just not enough time and resources, and you have to start cutting
MVP,
scope.
baby.
That's right, yeah. And so, yeah, I mean that can be demoralizing. It's one of the hardest things about productions. We talked about greenlight being exciting but nerve-wracking, and pre-production's all fuzzy rainbows and happy time. Production can be a lot of fun because you're making the game, but it can also be really depressing because of this part.
Well, I think once you get, I mean, that's the difference between like a seasoned vet and somebody who's just, doe-eyed newbie who's like, oh, anything's possible. And like you have to I mean, realistically, this game has to ship. So, you have to factor in scope that's realistic and whatnot. So, yeah. And I think a lot of these things people get very, like, I guess a good thing is like, or a good example. I mean, say like if you have like a texture, right, and you have all these high res textures everywhere, and this is usually when things go wrong. By the way,
Right.
just to cue our viewers in, and so you have all these like amazing textures, and then you go to, oh, it's we need to get some, we're over memory, so we got to reduce some of these down, and you see this like spectacular texture that's super high res, and it's say like a 4096. It's huge texture, right? And then okay, now that's a 256. Okay, that's a total screw up, right? That's but if it came down to like a 1024, is it like that bad? It probably is to you, but to the average person, they're not going to care. They're not going to know. It's fine. And I think you need to like realize that, and that's one thing as I've matured as a game developer, that that sort of thing it's like a diminishing return on your investment on some assets and stuff, and ways of doing things that might seem like, well, on this modeling forum everybody does it, like that's in like pretend land, right? This is like the battlefield, right? Like this is the real world. You can't do it that way, and it's not like you do sort of like sacrifice something to get the whole product out, and
Right.
everything is a negotiation.
Yep.
As that masterclass says, that everything's a negotiation. We get a cup of coffee is a negotiation.
Well,
That's actually a really great one.
My favorite production story that has to do with scope, and I've said this probably in about 1 million job interviews and to students I have, because I just love this story so much, is when I was working on BioShock Infinite, obviously being a huge AAA project, there's going to be scope, there's going to be scope issues, and things have to get removed and whatever. Rod Ferguson, who's a big time producer, he's at Blizzard now. He just shipped, huge AAA Gears of War game for Microsoft before. Now he's at Blizzard. He was brought on board, to help get BioShock Infinite done, and I was really impressed by his leadership, because what he did is he basically did this thing where whenever we had to make a scope decision, he always added something back. He added something back. When he had to take something away, I guess the way I describe it is, if you had to take, just to use a crude analogy here, if you were taking away 10 pounds of game dev, 10 pounds of game, he would add 2 or 3 pounds back. He would add some things back, and so it created a.
Did he take? Okay, well, do you think he took 12 and then gave 2 back, so then he was taking 10?
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that he never did a major scope reduction without adding some small things back in also, and so it created this interesting kind of improvement in morale. It never really felt like you were slashing and burning the game because,
Yeah.
they'd be like, oh, well, we got to remove this big thing. But hey, look at these cool little things that were going to be cut that we added back. And I thought that was cool leadership. I thought that was a good way to kind of, and also it made the game better too. I mean, adding those things back in improve the game. So there wasn't this loss of, sometimes, on game projects it can be pretty demoralizing because you see the game you dreamed it can be and it gets cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. And when you do the kind of style of scope reduction that he did, you have this happening, but you also have kind of a parallel line of the game getting better too in some different ways, and it kind of balances. And that's always, I've said that to about 1 million different people now because I thought that was, wow, yeah, that's really cool production leadership. So, all right, Kip, wow, we've gone through greenlight, we've gone through pre-production, we've talked about production. I guess in our next podcast we're going to actually talk about now, no one in the games industry actually says post-production. That's not really a term that we use. It's more like movies and music and things. It's more like the certification process, the beta process, the getting the game shipped. That's our next podcast, I think, is finishing the dang game, right? And that's if you've been if the green light is scary but fun, and pre-production is just pure rainbows and unicorns, and production is still kind of fun but can be kind of a drag, this last bit is kind of the worst and best part of game development all at once, isn't it? Because you're actually getting something done, and that's amazing, but it's also like,
it's painful, man.
Yeah, it's rough.
Painful.
Yeah.
It's definitely a slog, but I don't know. It's like that last. I don't know. It's such a sweet spot to get to too, because it's like I'm there. Like it's not like you just got to go the distance. Like you don't even have. Sometimes you don't even have shoes on. You don't even have legs. You're like you're not even at the track or whatever. You're like, so I mean, to get to that point, yeah. I mean, you're really in a golden state as is. So I mean, I think when I get there this next time, I'm gonna savor this part.
You should, yeah, especially because I don't really get the same. Being in academia, it's a little different. I mean, I see that with my student projects that I help shepherd through. I kind of feel it through them, and they kind of go through it in a sense. But it's not quite the same as like a big team production. So definitely savor it. I love what I'm doing, but I'll always kind of miss that world a little bit. So anyway, thank you for checking us out again. Definitely click that bell, click subscribe, give us the 5-star
hit like or
review,
subscribe,
do all that stuff. Yeah, send us suggestions for podcasts, for shows. I know that we're gonna do one thing I'm planning on doing with Patrick and Adam soon, and Kip, you're welcome to join us if you want. Is we're gonna be talking about the classic Japanese shoot 'em up company Toa Plan. I hope that's how you say that. I have to I never know how to say those names. It's TOAPLAN. They did Tiger Heli on the NES.
I know Tiger Heli. Yeah,
which is an awesome game, and they did a bunch of other great shooters.
I played the heli out of that one.
That's great. That's the best moment. That's the MVP, the minimum viable product or punchline of this podcast.
I'm a father. I could make that joke.
That's right. But they did a ton of really great games. They lasted from about 1984 to about 1993, 1994, and then they became a bunch of other companies. You know how that happens. But we're going to do a podcast with them soon. Now, because I'm moving, there might be some greatest hits type podcasts coming to fill the gap. But hopefully, because it's an in-town move and I won't be moving across the country, it won't actually take that long, and maybe there'll be just one of those. I don't know. But Kit, until next time, stay on the grid
and keep well hid.